Hello everybody and welcome to the channel of 5th Gen Isn't Pokemon. Today we are going to do a Pokemon Unite tier list. Now, this tier list is authoritative and quantified. And the reason it's authoritative and quantified is because instead of sitting here and expressing my own opinions to rank Pokemon, I have instead pulled data from the top 100 Pokemon Unite players through the game and seen what they've been playing a lot. If you're unfamiliar, I have been making these posts on Reddit. So there's the top 100 Pokemon Unite players October 4th update, fuck whatever posts. So I'm the one who's been doing those, and this is a video explaining it in case reading is hard for you, because reading is hard and nobody likes it. So what we're going to do is go over each of the Pokemon alphabetically and see where they sit among the top 100 players and do a little bit of shit analysis, because I really just want to express all of my opinions as much as possible. So first Pokemon we have is Absol. Nobody plays Absol. Moving on. Next Pokemon we have is Blastoise. Currently, Blastoise has 7 players, putting him up in the frequent tier. It's pretty good. Last time we checked in, Blastoise was at 5, and before the big, September nerf patch, Blastoise was seeing 20 of the top 100 players. So he's a very necessary member of any team. You couldn't play without running into a Blastoise. So the nerf brought him down to 4. Now he's up to about 7. So he's been staying in that area. So since the patch, Blastoise has really found a good niche. Is frequent in play, but not overwhelmingly so. So good nerf. Blastoise is standing the test of time without being overly dominant. Next, we have Blissey. Blissey doesn't get a lot of play. 2.5 people main Blissey. I think I should explain how halves work. So, in order to calculate this data, we look at the last 20 matches each of the 100 people played. Last 20 ranked matches. Sometimes of those 20 matches, there will be a tie between 2 Pokemon, like maybe they played Blissey 10 times and Degas 10 times. And initially, what would happen is I'd go and look at later more games and aggregate it out from there. But what happened this time was like the second or third person I hit had 10 Venusaur, 10 Sylveon. When I pulled up to 30, then it was just Venusaur, Sylveon, and Cinderace at 10 each. Win rates were the same. So I said, fuck it. We'll do a 50-50 split. So Blissey has 2.5 mains, because that's an amount of people. That's 2 tall people and 1 person cut in half. Blissey doesn't see a lot of play, primarily because she's an in-your-face support. Blissey's tanky, but not tanky enough to get dove on. So we see her here at 2.5. That's about where she's been since high point of September 28th, when there were 7 whole people were playing Blissey. Overall, very outclassed by Degas, but does do some different things. Next, we have Charizard. Charizard has sat in unused since July. Today is different, though. Charizard's niche. 1 whole person is playing Charizard. Congratulations. I know that was a thing that a lot of people thought would happen after the buff with the mobile update. And finally, someone went, fuck it, let's play Charizard. So someone said, fuck it, let's play Charizard. Cinderace. Now, Cinderace peaked in late July with 24 people out of 100 playing him, and then got patched and cratered to Greninja. With the mobile update, Cinderace did get a little bit of a buff and saw some more people play him. He peaked at about 7, so he was up here in frequent tier. When Sylveon came out, dropped down to niche, and since then has been able to claw his way back up to infrequent. So, of the people that were playing Cinderace, a lot of them left when Sylveon came out. After Sylveon got nerfed, some of them came back, but we're still seeing a lot of those people stick with Sylveon. There are a decent amount of attackers that you're going to see in that infrequent tier that are kind of like secondary and tertiary picks to other Pokemon. And that's kind of where Cinderace is at right now, which is, it's not a bad place to be. We're going to see a lot of Pokemon that aren't there. Cramorant. Cramorant, for the first time since the game came out, is at 0. No one's playing Cramorant. Now, Cramorant peaked at 14, in mid-August. And since then, it's just kind of been this trajectory that went downward. For a while, he was the like secondary pick up there with Ninetales, if you didn't, for like a ranged attacker, but is kind of just gone away as Venusaur's risen to dominance, as Sylveon's been released. So Cramorant's at 0 now, which is kind of a bummer, but you know, life happens. Crustal's also at 0. Nobody likes Crustal. He's not even a Pokemon. Next we have Eldegoss. Now, Eldegoss is going to be our first Pokemon in the problematic tier. I don't think that's an indictment of Eldegoss being inherently unbalanced in any way. This is more of a problem with the general game, in that Eldegoss is our only ranged supporter. And as long as there's only one ranged supporter, that is going to be a very common thing that people are going to play. So it's not that Eldegoss needs a nerf, because when they nerfed Eldegoss, the player base, like, it dropped for a minute, but it came back. It's that Eldegoss needs competition in the role it plays. The only other, like, real supporter role we have is Blissey, at least as far as, like, you know, healing and defensive bonuses. We have Blissey, but Blissey is in the battlefield getting the shit kicked out of her. Eldegoss is off to the side, not caring. So until we have something else that can do that ranged supporter role that Eldegoss has, I don't think it means that Eldegoss needs a direct nerf, but instead an indirect nerf of another Pokemon fulfilling its niche. Garchomp's at 0, nobody plays Garchomp. Gardevoir's at 0, nobody plays Gardevoir. Gengar's at 0, nobody plays Gengar. It's not shocking. Outside of like 1 or 2 instances, no one has played any of these Pokemon, and that's it. Greninja. Greninja was at one point the most meta-dominant Pokemon in the game, seeing 27 of the top 100 players play it, which is insane, especially when you think of that group as 25 stacks. I mean, it's not, because Greninja players. Greninja did get initially an indirect nerf with the introduction of Blastoise, who became the premier jungler upon its release, and then a direct nerf of losing its HP. And since then, Greninja is now sitting in infrequent with Cinderace, the two of them together at last. Now, Greninja's honestly probably just going to stay there. It's still very good Pokemon, very strong Pokemon, just pretty squishy. Next, we have Lucario. Lucario is still sitting in the problematic tier, with 20 of the top 100 players playing Lucario. I've never liked Lucario as a Pokemon, so, but, you know, people do, and now he's in the problematic tier because he can't die, he can do a lot of damage, and he can move around a lot. So until Lucario sees some pretty significant nerfs, he's going to stay up there. And that's not even... It's not like the Eldegoss situation where an indirect nerf would be able to probably lower Eldegoss down to maybe dominant, frequent, something like that. No, Lucario is just going to stay here until he's directly neutered. So, problematic Lucario. Please fix Lucario. Please, please, please. Maybe, like, nerf Steadfast. I would love if they nerf Steadfast. I don't like that procs every 30 seconds. That just kind of becomes every fight, and it's frustrating. And I don't like it. I don't like you, Lucario. Please stop being good. Next we have Machamp. No one plays Machamp. Next up is Mamoswine. Mamoswine is sitting in the niche tier with 2 whole players. Let's fix all these. There we go. Now the order's right. 2 whole people play Mamoswine. Upon release, nobody was really playing Mamoswine, and we didn't start seeing players until right before the Sylveon nerf. And I don't think it has anything to do with the Sylveon nerf. I just think Mamoswine was inherently a little more difficult for people to understand. But a few of them have, and he's getting some play. Next up, we have Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime is sitting up in the frequent tier. Mr. Mime has been generally seeing play throughout the game. There's a brief period where no one was playing Mr. Mime, but for the most part, Mr. Mime has seen a handful of players. 6 is pretty high, which is where he's at right now. And that seems to indicate that a lot of people respect his damage and his ability to not die, And those are two very good things. So good job, Mr. Mime. You're a hero to all of us, especially the French. Next up is Ninetales. Now, Ninetales has a very similar story to Cramorant, as no one is playing Ninetales, but there was a point in time where people were playing Ninetales. Ninetales was never quite as prevalent as Cramorant, but the two of them were both, like ranged attackers and saw relatively similar levels of play. But ever since, it wasn't inherently the Venusaur buff that kind of like brought them down. They had a little bit of a trajectory downward before that, but the Venusaur buff plus the Sylveon introduction has really removed the two of them from competition within the meta currently. Next we have Pikachu. Pikachu has half a player, which I'm rounding up all halves, so Pikachu is officially niche. Good job. Pikachu is another one of those like kind of in the meta, kind of not cases, where he's really frequented between like 0 and 3 players. And last time no one was playing Pikachu, but this time someone's playing Pikachu sometimes, and that's where he's at. I know some people have said Pikachu might be kind of like what the devs look at when they're balancing other Pokemon around Pikachu. I don't necessarily buy into that, given it doesn't see a lot of play, and you'd think something that's more maybe in the infrequent tier would be used for that kind of system. But people play Pikachu, you just, tapers off late game. Next, we have Slowbro. Slowbro is sitting in the infrequent tier with 2.5 players. Good job, Slowbro. You and Blissey can hang out by rounding up into the tier. Slowbro, upon the nerf of Blastoise, did start seeing more play. Even though Slowbro got nerfed in the same balance patch, I think it's just because he doesn't know he's been nerfed yet, so people were playing him. Did drop a little bit, so maybe he's finally realized it and Surf deals less damage or whatever the nerf was. I don't remember. But Slowbro's here, it gets some play. I think it's interesting that early on people thought Scald was shit, but when people started like picking up on what you could do with Scald, that led to more play for Slowbro. And I, as someone who plays a lot of Slowbro and likes Scald because I don't have standards in life, am happy to see him get the love he rightfully deserves as a Pokemon everybody gets immediately and is really good at not dying. Speaking of not dying, we have Snorlax. Unfortunately, Snorlax's meta position is that of someone who is dying. Snorlax peaked early on with about 19 players, and now he's sitting here at 1.5, which is his lowest recorded score to date. As I note, the number 1 player currently plays Snorlax. So of the remaining 99, half of one of them plays Snorlax. Block is really good. I don't really know what happens. I'm not good at that level of meta-analysis. But he's here in the niche tier. Good job, Snorlax. You're still here for some reason. Sylveon. When Sylveon released, she released up in the problematic tier. Since then, there has been a nerf, and she has moved. Not to dominant, not to frequent, but to infrequent. 5 people are still playing Sylveon. She's settled down in the meta. She's got a level. It's 5 apparently, as one of many ranged attacker options you can pick. And honestly, I think it's kind of healthy to have a lot of Pokemon with like sort of similar roles, and Sylveon and Cinderace and Greninja. Cinderace and Greninja definitely lean jungle a bit more, but to have so many different ranged attackers within the same tier is honestly pretty good for the meta overall. Because the last thing you want is an overly dominant meta around 1 or 2 Pokemon. Lucario. So, you can complain if you want, but honestly, this is pretty good, all things considered. Or at least compared to where we've been at, which we'll touch on a little bit later. After Sylveon, we have Talonflame. Now, Talonflame used to be trash. He was so bad. And now he's not. He's up here in the infrequent tier. Upon getting the great buff in the mobile update, Talonflame has moved up to 3 players and has been pretty consistent at that since. So it's good to see that they figured out what they need to do to make a speedster viable, and hopefully they do something similar to Absol or Gengar going forward, because overall speedsters are not very represented, and that's just a problem in game design, because if you're making a role that you're kind of like designing around one thing, and then people play Blastoise, who's a defender, because they do the role of a speedster better, that's a failing on the design part. So the fact that they've been able to kind of realize, hey, maybe we should make speedsters better, and they just focused all of that energy into Talonflame, and they gave us a viable Pokemon out of it, is good. Because last time they tried to buff him, it didn't do shit. He was still trash. We're coming up on the end here, which is Venusaur. Now, Venusaur, before Sylveon, was in the dominant tier. 13 players. When Sylveon came out, Venusaur dropped to infrequent. And now Venusaur is right back up to dominant. In fact, Venusaur has more players now than he did before Sylveon released, sitting at 15. So everybody who abandoned Venusaur for Sylveon, it wasn't because Venusaur was suddenly bad. It's just because he was objectively outclassed. And now that Sylveon's been brought down to reasonable levels, Venusaur still probably needs a nerf. It's very scary. Nerf Venusaur, nerf Lucario, put in an alternative to Degas. I don't know, make Gengar cool again. I don't know. That's what I want. That'd be cool. Next we have Wigglytuff. Wigglytuff is in the infrequent tier. So Wigglytuff, similar to Blastoise, peaked at 20 players after her great buff. And then with the mobile update, she cratered down to initially 5, then 3, and now back up to 4. So I was concerned that Wigglytuff players may be just abandoning her wholesale. However, it looks like the player base for Wigglytuff is stable at this point, and she's going to hang around. So that's cool. And finally, we have Zeraora as the only speedster that anybody played prior to Talonflame getting a buff. And Zera is also going to sit in the infrequent tier with 4 players. It's been pretty stable within the meta most of the game. That's pretty good. So another good, well-balanced jungler, even if it's just Lucario again in aesthetic. And Clefable's not in the game, so let's just put her up in problematic, because that's upsetting to me. Anyway, that's tier list. So now we'll move on to something else. So the other thing I wanted to touch on in this video, besides the tiers, is how much each role is seeing play within the top level meta right now. So we're going to start with all-rounders, since I want to approach this alphabetically, and all-rounders does come first. Now, all-rounders, as you can see, we have at the bottom, have been pretty consistently at about 20 players, or a fifth of the player base, which in a normal world would be healthy. There are 5 roles. In theory, 1/5 of players would be playing one role. The problem is almost all of these players are Lucario. Lucario has been the preeminent all-rounder, and with the limited exceptions of at the beginning of the game and a couple blips of like one person playing Machamp, Lucario is the only all-rounder that sees play, and that's dangerous. So all-rounders at, like, from an aerial view seem fine. But when you get into it, it's just Lucario. And if Lucario's out, I don't think that means we start seeing people switch to Machamp or switch to Charizard, but they might just go for other roles entirely. And we could see all-rounders have much lower prevalence within the meta. So as a group, all-rounders do need a lot of help. But before we even know what that looks like, we need to see a Lucario nerf. Next, we have attackers. Attackers are actually in a pretty good place right now. They are 27.5 of the 100 players, which is pretty well below their historical average of 35, which makes sense. We had periods where they were seeing 54. Over half of the Pokemon in the top 100 were attackers. Now it's much more manageable. Venusaur is a big problem. Don't get me wrong. But outside of Venusaur, we see a lot of them that get moderate amounts of play. And we have a few that would probably jump back in following a Venusaur nerf, primarily Ninetales and Cramorant. Defenders are in an interesting position. There are less defenders now than there were as far as players go, though a lot of that was due to Blastoise being the premier jungler and edging out a lot of the attackers in Speedsters. Because, I mean, every defender is basically a different role, but tanky. And now we're at a point where the defenders are underrepresented. They're 13 of the 100 players, but like within that class, all of the Pokemon outside of Crustle do see some representation within play. So while the role probably needs a little bit more play overall, within the role itself, there's some pretty healthy divisions, just like there are with attackers, which is pretty good. Really, I feel like all of them have some pretty healthy balance. All-rounders, it's really bad. Attackers, I mean, could be better, but still fine. But yeah, they're all pretty good within balance within role, which is nice. It's just role within meta where we see some suffering. Speaking of role within meta seeing some suffering, we have Speedsters. There's 7. Speedsters, as you can see, had a lot of dry spells where nobody was playing Speedster or it was just Zeraora. So following the September 20th update, seeing some Talonflame players, that's good. Speedsters are definitely in a better position now than they had been, but the role itself still needs some work. And then finally, we have supporters. Supporters, pretty dominant. They're 31.5, which is the highest number at the moment. They have peaked as high as 43 over here. And that's just because every supporter fulfills such a different role. You have a ranged support in Degas. You have a battlefield medic in Blissey. You have a crowd control machine in Wigglytuff. And you have the preeminent damage dealer in Mr. Mime. So supporters have a lot of diversity within their role, which is very good. They're a little overrepresented, but I think that's mostly because there's so much diversity within the role of supporter that you can play games where you have more than one and they're doing very distinct things in a way that might not necessarily be true with other roles, or that other roles don't have the ability to fluctuate with. So overall, with role frequency, we are seeing some issues with some, primarily Speedster, Defender, and All-Rounder are suffering a little bit. But overall, it's actually better than it's been. The standard deviation right now between each role is 8. The historical average has been 9.5. For those of you who are unfamiliar, standard deviation just it measures like the deviation from expected value that you would see. So in this case, the expected value is going to be 20. So how far each roll is away from that. The highest we've seen is 13.5. And the lowest we've seen is 7.6, which we actually saw in the Sylveon fucking everything up update. So 8's pretty good. 8 is pretty good. So overall, it's getting better, but could use work. And that's your October 14th. Ignore the 3rd. I definitely didn't collect this data on the 13th. That is your October 14th update. So enjoy, I don't know, getting your jungle stolen by a Crustle or whatever it is that happens when we play this game. Have a good rest of your lives.